Okay, let me walk you through how to set your timing on your Harley-Davidson engine. It's really easy to do. It's the same as if you're using one with a vertical timer like a Flathead or a Knucklehead or a Panhead. It's really the same method. It's just that the timer's in a different spot, but it really is the same method. So I'll show you how to do it on this, and then I'll show you how to do it on the Flathead too, which has a vertical timer, just so you can see it. But what you want to do is take your spark plugs out, and you're going to roll your engine around, and what you're going to focus on is your front intake push rod. So my front intake push rod just closed. It was open in the cycle where I started. So I'm going to roll the engine around again until it opens and closes. There it's opening, right? And then it's going to come down and close. And when it gets all the way to the bottom, see how that started to roll around? There's no tension on it. And I use old wooden clothespins. I've had these for years. I've used them for years. It's a great way to visually follow what's going up and down, because you can lose it sometimes with your eyesight. And it also keeps the push rod tube out of the way so you can see what you're doing. Once you have your front intake push rod closed after the intake stroke, I'm going to show you what you got to do on the other side of the motorcycle. And there you can see my line just rolled into the timing window, which is my front cylinder advance mark on this motorcycle. That advance mark, what it indicates is 35 degrees before the front piston is at top dead center, which is all the way up. And you want to fire the spark plug before top dead center. I'm going to go over that for you in a few minutes. But once you get the timing mark in the hole, your advance mark at 35 degrees before top dead center, now you're going to want to go back around and check your ignition points breaker or electronic ignition sensor to see when your points are opening, because they should be opening exactly at this point. Okay, so I got my front cylinder on a 35 degree before top dead center advance mark, so I know these points should be firing when the advance unit is at full advance. So I used a pair of long bent needle nose pliers. I've always used these for this because it's hard to get in here past the condenser. I took the condenser out. It's just a lot easier to access the advance unit. I use these needle nose pliers and I open the points, and you can hear them and see them arc. But if you can't, there's another way to do it, and that's with a test light. Here's my test light, and you can use either end however you want. You want to connect one end to ground and one end to the contact on the breaker. I'm just going to go ahead and ground this right to my push rod. Here we go. When my light comes on, right when I hit full advance, that's how I know my timing's perfect. And if your timing isn't right on, you just loosen these two standoff screws here and rotate your points plate around, your timer plate around, until you're at the spot that I just described to you. I want to give you kind of a general concept of how you kickstart a motorcycle, because how the engine's rolling through the cycles is really important. So let's roll this Shovelhead through the cycles, whether it's a Harley-Davidson Shovelhead, Panhead, Knucklehead, Flathead, Sportster. It's all the same. They're all 45-degree air-cooled V-twins, and they all have the same general cam timing and firing sequence. So, you know, I can show you this for one model, but it's going to be the same for all of them. This is a lot to unpack, so let me roll through this with you. So I'm going to roll through this engine and watch these push rods, and I'm going to describe to you what's happening here. Okay, watch this. Here comes your front intake stroke, right? Your front intake is taking in air and fuel. At the time that's happening, you just fired your rear cylinder, because now that you fired your rear cylinder, watch your rear exhaust is opening. So that means it's pushing that gas out. This is critical to kickstarting, because this rear cylinder just fired, that's your flywheel momentum to push your front cylinder over. So you might be kicking on your kicker lever, but the rear cylinder firing is going to be what helps you fire this front cylinder. So you have to take note of this, because the front cylinder just intook fuel and air and closed, and now it's compressing and getting ready to fire. And already your rear is coming around and opening again and taking air and fuel for the rear cylinder. And that's why the Harley-Davidson has the potato sound, the potato, 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 potato when it idles. Because they fire sequentially, boom, boom, one right after the other. And then there's a long duration where they don't fire, and then boom, boom, and they fire again. And there's a long duration, boom, boom. And that's kind of how this thing works, and that's why they have the sound they have. But it's also critical to understanding kickstarting. So that's what's critical, because when you kickstart, you want to be kickstarting when this rear one is just firing, so you're getting a boom, boom sequence. If you kick on the front cylinder, it takes a long duration of flywheel rotation before the rear cylinder fires. If you kick when the rear cylinder is firing, you get the power from that cylinder firing to help you with the front cylinder. So you get a sequential firing, boom, roll it through with your Kickstarter, helps the front cylinder go. That one's going to fire also. Then you have that long duration for the flywheel momentum to start the engine. You need that flywheel rotation to keep the rods and pistons moving so the rear cylinder can fire again in about 270 degrees. So let's take a look through that. There's your rear. Your front one's exhausting. Now here comes your front. It's going to intake. It's going to fire. Boom. Here goes your rear. Intake, fire, front, intake, fire. And then a long rotation. I hope that makes sense to you. But you want to be kicking when this rear cylinder is firing. Because once this rear cylinder is firing, you know, the next thing that's going to happen is the front's going to fire. And you want those two firings in a rotation versus one. Okay, all Harley-Davidson air-cooled V-twins are going to run lean when they're cold. So they need a lot of fuel, which is usually why you choke them or pull the enricher on them, which is a version of a choke. It's actually not a proper choke, but it's a version of a choke. So they always like a lot of fuel when you're starting them. So I'm going to pull the choke on this. Usually give them a couple squirts of fuel. There's a couple different things you can do. I'm going to show you with the Linkert what you do. This is a stock carburetor. Stock carburetor, you know, a key-in carburetor, whether it's a CV or the butterfly key-in, or even an S&S carburetor, is going to want some fuel and choke before you kickstart. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Watch my butterfly close. So there's my choke. I just want you to see, I'm not trying to snow you or anything. These exhaust pipes are cold. This engine hasn't been run in several days, so everything's cold. I can touch everything without burning my hands. So I'm not trying to give you a warmed up engine and show you how I do it easy after the engine's already warmed up. This is a cold start, because you start them different, warm and cold, and I'm going to show you that too. So this is a cold start. So what I'm going to do with this, with the key off, I'm going to open the butterfly. So the choke is closed. I open the throttle. I'm going to give it a couple of clicks. And that's going to draw a lot of fuel and air right into the engine. Now I'm going to turn the key on, and I'm going to kick it. So you saw how that started, just a couple kicks. I don't usually kickstart this motorcycle, and the Super Glide has a funny way that the Kickstarter works on it versus other motorcycles, but regardless, you saw how easy that started. Now I'm going to go through the mechanics of this for you, because I've seen a lot of people do it different ways. I've seen this method. Doesn't usually seem to work very well. I've seen the guys that get up on it and it's all or nothing like that. Doesn't seem to work very well. Let me show you how I do it. I weigh in as a light heavyweight, 180, 185 pounds. Got strong legs, you know, built pretty solid. But I use my legs. I use a little bit of my body weight in my legs, but the thing I don't want you to do, and you can't do, is extend your leg fully. A lot of engines with high compression are going to want to push back on you real hard, but the thing you can't do is let your leg lock out. And so you need a lot of leg strength in your upper thigh to keep your leg from locking out. So if you watch me do this in slow motion, you'll see I don't really extend my leg fully. It looks like it goes all the way extended, but it doesn't. I get real close, but I push on my leg, and then as I push with my leg, I drop my hips and allow all my weight to push down into my kick starts. I'm gonna go ahead and close my choke again, turn my key on, and watch this. You'll see. So now I'm going to do this for you slow, just so you can see it. But I have the key on, and it should still start even though I'm not going at full speed. But I feel around. That's my front cylinder. Now here's my rear cylinder. And I know that because when I kick through again, it kicks for a long duration, which I know is my flywheel's going a long duration between the front and rear cylinder firing. So now here I am, I'm where I want to be. That's my rear cylinder. And now I'm going to kick through it pretty slow. 9-to-1 compression. It's 80 cubic inches. It's not the easiest thing to kick over, a stroker motor. Actually, you think a stroker would be harder to kick over, but it's really not, because even though your piston's traveling a longer distance, your flywheels are also swinging around harder and heavier. So, you know, the flywheels actually help you with the kick-starting thing, and that's the trick is you want to use your body weight and your hips and your leg muscle and dropping all your body weight into the kick. You want to use the flywheels, and you want to use the rear cylinder firing. So those three things, that's what it takes. Now this is a 1937 Harley Davidson WLDR factory race bike. It's a Flathead. You can see my timing marks just come into the window. And then my breaker points are just going to start to open up. That's an air load of the timer cam, which is for the front cylinder. The wide load back here is for the rear cylinder. So you're going to watch my breaker points just start to open at full advance. There they go. See them open. Just start to open at full advance, where my timing marks where it needs to be in the hole. So I have this time just like I had the Shovelhead Sturgis time. Now I'll put it back together and we'll give it a kickstart. Okay, Linkert's got a pretty unique choke setup where when you close the butterfly for the choke, it lifts the needle for the idle circuit, which makes the idle circuit a little richer, because like I told you, these things run lean. So nice, open the choke. Okay, I'm gonna give it a couple primer kicks with the throttle open. And then on the Linkert, you want to close your choke about halfway until it warms up. This is a 1937 Harley Davidson WLDR factory race bike. It's a Flathead, only about 6.5 to 1 compression. So it only has 60% of the compression as the other motorcycle, a lot easier to kick. But still, the technique is the same. You'll watch as I do it. All right, so there's a few factors you have to make sure you have in place to be able to do this successfully. One is you have to have your engine tuned properly. And by having your engine tuned properly, I mean a few things. Ignition timing, which we're going over here in this video. You got to have your carburetor adjusted right, and that usually means your timing has to be set right. You have to make sure you have a good compression, you don't have any air leaks. You have to make sure your valves are adjusted properly. And valve adjustment's a whole nother subject we'll have to go into. That's kind of a deep dive we'll go into in another video. But your engine has to be tuned properly. You have to have a good spark from your magneto or your ignition. Your spark plugs have to be gapped right. You can't have them all fouled out and burning rich. So all these things have to be right for a really good, easy kickstart. You know, for your intake air leak, you always want to check with a starting fluid. Don't use WD-40 or any kind of other fluid. People say they use different things. You either want to use a rag with gasoline on it and put that rag in there, which is not always good because it's a fire hazard, or you want to spray starting fluid right on your intake manifold connection to the heads, because that's where you're going to find out if you have an air leak or not. You know, and assuming you don't have any air leaks, assuming your timing is dead on, assuming your valves are adjusted right and your carburetor is tuned right, if you follow my kickstarting tips, this thing should start over for your first time every time. All right, let's see if I can fire the Sturgis by hand. That's when you know you got one tuned right. You can actually start it by hand. I don't recommend you try this because you can get hurt, and I mean really hurt, if it kicks back on you and you're not doing it right. I use the same exact technique I use with my leg. I drop my body weight into it, but I also extend my arms like I'm doing a close grip bench press, but I don't lock my elbows out. If you lock your elbows out and it kicks back, you got real problems. Just double down on your health insurance before you try this. But here we go, I'm gonna turn the key on. Roll it around, my rear cylinder compression. That's 80 cubic inches, 9-to-1 compression. I'm a light heavyweight. That's how you know when you got them right. The most important tip I can give you is have it tuned right, know what you're doing, get your technique down, and commit to it. It'll start easy like that every time. I mentioned your ignition timing, and let me explain this to you really simply, really quickly. So ideally, when your piston comes up on the compression stroke and gets to the very top, ideally you'd fire your spark plug right then when the piston's at top dead center, because you want the spark plug to fire, the gases to expand, and that to push the piston down as the expansion happens, and that's where you get your power inside your cylinder. But what happens is when your spark plug fires, it takes a second for that fuel to expand and ignite, and that fuel travels across your combustion chamber at about 120 miles an hour, which seems really fast, but it's not fast when the engine is going 4,000, 5,000 RPM. I mean, there's not a whole lot of time for the fuel to expand. So what happens is you fire the spark plug early, which is what you call your timing advance. You fire the spark plug early before the piston gets to top dead center, and that allows the fuel to start combusting and expanding. By the time the piston gets to the top, you're already into the expansion process. So that's why they call it 35 degrees before top dead center, because you're firing that spark plug before the piston's where you would have it in an ideal situation. So different engines like Flatheads, the spark plug is usually moved further away from the center of the piston, and it has further to travel. So a lot of times on a Flathead, or like a Harley JD, for example, where the spark plug's really far from the piston, you're going to fire the spark plug even earlier, sometimes 40 degrees, 45, 50 degrees advance. So generally speaking, on a Harley Davidson, it's 35 degrees advance for like a Knucklehead, Panhead, Shovelhead Evo. I think it's a little more for a Flathead, but that's why you fire the spark plug early, because it does take time for that fuel to combust and expand, and you're compensating for that time it takes, even though it's a fraction of a second, by flywheel rotation. So you're firing it early. And having all that stuff, having your timing set up right like I showed you, is critical to making this kickstart process easy.